Welcome, 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 friend. I'm TK, your tour guide to the past, and you are listening to For the Love of History, the podcast where we talk about world history, women's history, weird history, and today, kinky history. I cannot tell you how excited I am to have the one and only Kinky History Esmé James on the podcast today. So excited to have you. Thank you, Esmé.
Thank you for having me. I've been so excited for this one. I was just saying I've been binging the podcast on a long haul flight over. I am so ready to go.
I have been a big fan of Kinky History and Esmé for a long time now. And when I sent off a chaos email a while ago and I was like, do you want to come on my podcast? She replied and I was like, yes, the stars are aligning. Everything is wonderful. And here we are today to talk about Dr. James's, congratulations, by the way, on your, we're going to talk about Dr. James's Kinky History book. We're going to talk to her about her path to becoming a sex historian and, anything else that we can think about right now. So yeah,
I love it. We've got a lot of sexy history to go along the way, so we are perfectly fine. I mean, just opening up a can of worms of sex history on a podcast, we've got endless possibilities.
Yes. And I feel that it goes without saying that maybe this episode, not a safe for work one, but you can pop a cheeky little headphone in and listen to it if you would like, if you want to live on the dangerous side, but just so you are aware. So let's dive right in and talk about how you started your journey of becoming a sex historian. How did that all play out?
So I went to university originally to study the history of religion. So obviously things have gone very off track for me.
Yeah.
But what I've always been very interested in is looking at the experiences that bring people together. People across various times and cultures. This kind of sense of coming out of yourself and joining with someone else. That's what I've always been interested in. And it occurred to me pretty early on as I was diving into the history of literature, the history of philosophy, that all of those various parts of history that my professors and teachers kind of, left in a little footnote when things got a little bit too freaky and sexy in class were most interesting to me. I got a name very early on for always wanting to talk about the parts of history that, there wasn't a lot of research and a lot of, I guess, not interest, but it's that kind of stuff that once you talk about sex in academia in particular, you're very much tainted in a way. You don't casually talk about sex. You're either the sex person or you apologize and never do it again. And it was around the time in about 5 years into university that I started writing freelance, and I wrote this article about the history of the dildo as a favor to a friend, and I'd been asked to do it. And this very much started, I think, a spiral into this world that I'm in now, because I became so fascinated by the research that I picked up. And also it was probably, in terms of academic output, the thing that other people were really interested in as well. What is the history of the dildo? How old is it? How long have we used it? All of those kind of questions. And that's really just kind of what kickstarted where I am today, I guess.
That's amazing. I'm so glad that religious history didn't work out for you. That's incredible. Thank you. So your book, Kinky History, how did that get started? So you were working on your PhD, and what was the moment where you're like, you know what? I'm going to write a book.
I'm going to write a book as well. I mean, to any listeners out there, I don't recommend writing a PhD and a book at the same time. I highly do not recommend. When I look back at the last 2 years, there's been copious amounts of alcohol, coffee, and water consumed, sometimes just all in one go. There would just be various liquids all over the desk. I don't think it's healthy. I don't recommend it. But so a lot of what I've kind of done online talking about the history of sex has all come from the offcuts of the research I was doing in my PhD. Anyone who, if you've spent any time reading and learning, as you know, what you actually take away and put into a academic essay is about 1%, the tip of the iceberg of what you actually learn along the way. And so all of the fun tidbits that I found, I put onto my TikTok videos. And it was around this time that I was very fortunate to have been reached out to by a few publishers who saw the kind of literary potential of turning those videos in itself into a book, which is always something I'd wanted to do after I finished the PhD. So it was a bit of an honor to be able to do it earlier. And I also think that using that kind of, I say social media voice, but more of a conversational tone to kind of talk about research is so valuable, because a lot of what happens in this academic world of history, whether it's about the history of the dildo or the vibrator or the history of gender and identity, it stays very hidden in this kind of almost elitist society of knowledge. And what's so fun about social media is that we make knowledge accessible to everyone. So turning this into a book, it was so important to just keep that same voice, to make this conversational, like when you're getting drunk around a dinner table and telling your friends about how they used to spank in 18th century London. Like, that's the kind of energy we're bringing to the book and to anything to do with kinky history. And to this podcast now, apparently.
I absolutely love it. One thing that I really love that social media has now opened up the floor for such incredible history communication, and we're like one brick at a time tearing down that ivory wall that we're trying, you know.
I think it's been fascinating to see so many like history content creators in particular all over the world are really not only taking off and directing the way that social media can play a role in education, but also they're changing the academic landscape. The amount of courses that they have now for professors and academics about how to communicate your research online, or history creators who have come into positions like PhDs who are now doing half their component, like actually communicating their research online and half written. It's changing the way that we learn as well for everyone. I think it's so wonderful.
Wow, that's awesome. I have been out of formal academia for a while. I graduated quite some time ago. So I didn't know that that was happening. So that is really incredible. I love to see, I'm a teacher by trade, and I love to see that kind of stuff happening. So yay, my little teacher soul is super happy right now.
I love that. I love little teacher soul.
Thank you. So your book is full of a lot of outrageous historical anecdotes, and I would love if you could share some of your favorite stories that like made you laugh or made you go like, what? Excuse me, what?
There was a lot that came up. There was a whole range of ideas of stories that we had said, and there was some that we just came across along the way. What's so fun about the book was that I wrote it with my mum as the co-author. My mum is a statistician, and she worked on all of the contemporary research that's in the book, and she ran a survey of all contemporary statistical information that goes alongside my history information. Oh, wow. So when I say like I'm laughing out loud with my mum, because we are coming together to join what we've researched and think should go in the book and discussing how. And so I think one of the most hilarious conversations I ever had with my mum was to do with rimming. Because she had found this hilarious fact, which she kind of just texted to me one day, and the text popped up on my phone, and it was like, "Hi, honey, did you know that people are rimming today a lot more than they did 30 years ago? P.S. Are you coming for dinner? Love, Mum." And that's all I kind of got to see. And then I was like, my mum had all this information about how in the last year in major cities across the world, like Melbourne, New York, Toronto, we've seen an increase in young people engaging in rimming. Great. Wow. And so then my history brain then has to clock on to be like, great, how do we incorporate that fact into the book? And this ended up being a really fantastic story, which I think the chapter is called Talking in Tongues. And we do talk about the history of the oral practice of rimming, which had an incredibly interesting history, which I'd never learned about before. And one of my favorite anecdotes from this is the use of rimming in medieval times. which was one of the ways is that you could be charged with witchcraft. Yes.
Incredible. Is this going to have to do with the, we did an episode a while ago on the excommunication of cats from the Catholic Church.
Okay, also love that story. Love that story.
And there was some butthole play going on with that.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's actually very much connected to the same time period, because when we have this oral behavior of animals that is kind of described in a lot of medieval texts, it has to do with this changing Christian thinking. The body is considered sinful, right? The body is dirty, the body is sinful. And the further away you are from heaven, the more sinful you are. Therefore, your backside and everything that never sees the light is the most sinful part of your body. So the way that medieval, this is such a fun fact in itself, a lot of medieval manuscripts illustrated with depictions of animals such as cats and humans engaging in rimming along the outlines. Like, we imagine medieval manuscripts to have like flowers and harps. No, they often have animals rimming. And it was half an inside joke, half a way to keep people's attention. But also the kind of symbolism behind it is that if you are deranged enough to rim, your morality is so disordered because you are kissing the dirtiest part of the body, the part that's most ungodly. And so the only people who would do this are sinful, worshippers of the devil. And so around medieval times, you have all of these writings describing that witches not only go and sign their name in the book of the devil, as you see in like depictions like Sabrina today. No, they go and rim the devil. That's how they become witches.
I love it.
Yeah. A little bit of horny rimming, like literally horny rimming. And it's this really fascinating time in history. Whereas, you know, the knights, you've got the Friday the 13th, the knights who will get charged. One of the charges of like heresy that they were kind of condemned for in the list was that they practiced the act of rimming upon one another. And that was enough for them to be considered saintly.
Wow. That is incredibly interesting and so weird at the same time.
But what's so fascinating about that is that, you know, if we go back to medieval times and the depictions of this one sexual act, it's not about the sex act itself. It's about what it can tell us about that point in history, because that sex act has been practiced enough that we even have like a social kind of understanding and symbol for it, right? And so when you go to a time like today, where we've seen in the last 12 months that rimming is being practiced more by younger generations, what does that tell us about like the various like media and understandings that we have today? Like, there's a lot that sex behavior can actually tell us about underlying social beliefs and values and all of this, even if it's as silly as rimming.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I love when we can have something so silly but so socially informative at the same time. That's the best. That is so fun. And I love that you can joke about it and that you can make it fun and make it exciting, because it's ridiculous and it's hilarious, but it's also serious and very academic. And I think those things are not mutually exclusive. They can be together. And you combine them so well. So the field of like sex history in academia, how was your research for this book? Was it difficult? Because it seems from my outside perspective that it's not a very highly researched topic.
No.
Yeah. So
no. Look, it's in some ways it's hard, in other ways it's not. So you have the kind of viral facts about history that you can kind of find and access quite easily online. Like, people will quote things like, James Joyce was into farts. We know that. We have his fart letters up front and center. My favorite thing, they're ingrained in my brain. I hate that I can recite them by word, but I can. Terrible. You know, you have Mozart and his also like, you know, songs about poo. You have various facts that are in the social awareness enough that you can kind of, you know, the ways to navigate and find in and out. But what's really fun are the facts that unfortunately you can't find unless you accidentally stumble across them. So for me, that's been little things like one of the favorite facts that I kind of accidentally uncovered through researching and then found that there was other people out there who'd kind of confirmed it was about, you know, when you have a photo trend and people put little horn
Yeah, the
ears,
rabbit ears. Yeah.
the rabbit ears. This was one of my favorite things to kind of look at, was that the rabbit ears originated by this insult around the 14th to 17th century, and it was a way to call someone a cuckold. So
Oh,
it was a really insulting thing to do, was to slip and kind of like show the symbol of a horn to someone. And even more so, if they were foolish enough to not know that their wife was cheating on them, to demonstrate that they were even more foolish, you would slip the bunny ears symbol behind their head, which was the symbol of horns coming out of someone's head, which was the sign of the cuckold at the time. So you will see, it's genuinely fascinating that you have like illustrations like the famous Commedia dell'arte painting, which you'll see all of the actors, and one of them is basically doing bunny ears on someone else. And when you see this painting, you think it's a modern day thing, because you're like, but bunny ears, I did that in primary school on all my friends. Why is this in this like 15th century painting? I don't understand. But it like originated as an insult, as a way of calling someone a cuckold. And in a lot of times and cultures, still doing that bunny ears trend is not as fun and lighthearted as we might have it today. So in Portugal, even in some places in Spain, pornos, los cornos, putting the horns on, is like a way of saying you're a dirty cuckold. Like, that's
wow. Okay, note to self. None of this in Portugal.
none of this. But I think, that's even so interesting in the way that history evolves, because it's such an innocent trend today. And doing bunny ears, like we do that in family pictures. I've done that to my granddad, but that originated by saying, your wife is fucking someone else. Like, that's what that means only a few hundred years ago.
Oh, just wild to me. And it seems very like on brand for millennials, because that definitely, happened a lot during our millennial childhood, because we were listening to like Candy Shop and Disco Stick, and we were listening to like very, very, age inappropriate music at like school dances and stuff. So I feel that it's only appropriate that we were all calling each other cuckolds.
Just why not? What else do we have to add to it when you've already got Lady Gaga's Disco Stick? Like,
exactly. So you were mentioning that this symbol in Portugal and Spain means something completely different. So in your book, do you explore any sexual history trends or anything like that from other countries?
Yeah, so especially one of the things that we were really, really set on doing in this book is that a lot of, just because of, I suppose, the way that especially Western academia is skewed is to a Western landscape. And especially in my research, like my PhD, for instance, really focuses on 18th century, 17th century across Europe and America. Like, that's the zones. And so I know I can write and talk about those with a lot of confidence, and a lot of you can make fun of yourself. And so what we wanted to be able to do was to bring in all of the various different times and cultures that I have, in my normal research for my PhD, I have never really got to explore in too much depth. So we spoke to some other researchers along the way, and you've got to find the balance then, because I am very happy making fun of the likes of Mozart and Einstein and, but it's not making fun of it. You're getting this kind of like humor, right? And you're laughing with. But that is very, very different when I'm talking about a time and culture that I'm really not a part of. So we did a lot of consultations with other people, but then at the same time, you're not excluding this from this kind of like conversational humor and fun, but you're doing that in a way that also respects difference. So I think that's one of the things that I think we executed really well in the book, and that I'm very proud of. But that only becomes because of, the fantastic people we're able to work with, who were able to kind of sit down and also have that same conversational communication of that information with us that made it so special. So it was a very, like, a big privilege to be able to do this in the book anyway.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I appreciate that you go into other cultures as well, because I'm my area of expertise is over here in Japan. So I love the chapter on, I believe you have a whole chapter on the hentai and the tentacle stuff, right? Yes.
That was one of my favorite things.
Oh my gosh, I love it. So here, if you ever find yourself in Japan, send me a DM and I can take you to the Penis Shrine and Museum.
Okay, I'm there. Sign me up.
Yes, yes. And there they have a lot of original woodblock prints of the tentacle, the hentai porn with the octopi and the other fish and things like that.
I would give anything. What do I have to do?
Yeah, just come on over. You can sleep on my couch. It's fine. Like, we'll figure it out.
Sign me up. I'm there.
Yeah. It's so good. So what are some things from that chapter, without revealing the whole chapter, because I do want my listeners to go, read your book. What are some little tidbits that you can tell us from that chapter?
Okay, I love this chapter so much. And I also think this is a great example of the fact that, especially, I haven't read a lot of books that kind of cover, because it's really hard, right, to cover a lot of different times and places and cultures. But, we really try in that 400 pages to do as much as we can and put it in conversation. And where the hentai comes in, I think is a great example of how fun that can be to do, because we looked at the stats of Pornhub, right, for the last 4 years, and what the most popular categories of pornography is. And what you see is that hentai, which has kind of been sitting around 2 or 3, just really hits number 1 and just stays there while every other category is changing over the last 5 years. Like, hentai is continuous. And so you're like, why hentai? Historically, why hentai? Because you can see, like, over COVID, for example, pornographic categories that people are interested in reflect what's happening at the time. You see a lot of, in the top hits, we see stuff like roommates, we see stuff like gym workouts on YouTube. We're seeing things that reflect what people are doing, but hentai stays there. Why is that? And there's this incredible moment in the 19th century where hentai is basically invented. And it starts by artists as famous as Hokusai, who creates The Fisherman's Wife, a retelling of this fantastic fable about the princess who dives under the sea and steals a jewel from the Dragon King. And he is so mad by her theft that he sends his army of aquatic creatures after her. And in the original fable, she's killed, but gets to return the jewel to her fiance. In Hokusai's painting retelling this famous fable, she has a much happier ending, quite literally. And so she's painted with 2 octopi, giving her a very nice time. And it's kind of accompanied by text around the edge, which I don't know if you read the translation, but oh my God, it made me laugh so much. I think it's such a fantastic example of art that you would see and be like, oh, that's lovely. And then you realize that the text around it is basically audible description of the orgasm between both the octopus and the woman. Yes,
a lot of onomatopoeia in that one. Japan is very, very famous for its rich onomatopoeia in the language. So
the recording of the audiobook, that was my favorite moment. And weirdly enough, we ended up doing it in one take, just by how ridiculous it was for me to sit there with a very straight face and read it. So if you do get a second, that's my favorite thing to just, if I'm having a bad day, I'll just re-listen to me.
That part, the Hokusai Fisherman's Wife section, I love that.
But then they also, there's that question of, okay, well, why now octopuses? And what happens around this period in Japan is that we have a lot of censorship laws that are imposed across Japan on artists and what can be depicted in art. And once you get away from the fact that now nudity and sexual acts can't be depicted, what can you do? And after Hokusai and a few other artists have kind of demonstrated the ability to use tentacles as a way, and because even at the time it was challenged, and they're like, but it's animals. And this went across. Tentacles became a really popular way in art all of a sudden, because they also look quite phallic. They're still quite handsy. They're very accommodating, apparently. And so you have this kind of explosion of art that, you know, a lot of anime artists that we quote in the book as well, you know, manga and anime artists still talk today that it's one of the easiest ways to get through censorship laws, tentacles. And because of that, you kind of ingrain a fetish. That's what has essentially happened. So much so that this kind of idea of tentacle porn has taken off. You know, we saw it on Netflix's Sex Education. They do a Romeo and Juliet production that's filled with hot and heavy tentacles. You know, and I think that's such an incredible moment of history that's happened out of necessity, which becomes a kink, which leads to kind of cultural awareness. Like it's such a cool story there to tell.
It is. It's so interesting. And I mean, just a little side tangent, those censorship laws in the 19th century in Japan have created out of necessity some of the coolest art forms. One of my very favorite ukiyo-e woodblock print artists is Kunoichi Utagawa, and he, to get around the censorship, because he loved painting like women in interesting positions, especially in bathhouses. He loves bathhouses. And so there is a whole scene of cat women in bathhouses in various stages of undress and like getting into baths and things like that. It's incredible, but it's all cats. It's all cats. So we're bringing it full circle to the
That is marvelous. It's so fascinating how that happens. And art, like across times and periods, is always one of the heaviest influences when it comes to social and sex lives as well. Cats, bathhouses, or tentacles.
I love it. So that kind of brings me to my next question of, you know, in the time period when this was being made, these types of things were being made, they weren't necessarily kinky. They were getting around censorship laws. And I'm sure that throughout history, the definition of what is and what is not kinky has changed. So what kind of trends have you seen in your research?
It's interesting because even kink as a term, right, it defines something that sits outside of what is defined as normal for sexual behavior. And even today, that changes across places and cultures. In some places in the world, something like oral sex is kinky, right? That isn't what is considered normal, productive sexual acts. And the way that, you know, kink only kind of gets defined properly by the likes of Sigmund Freud and Carl von Ebing, that kind of like 19th century turn. There's never a podcast where I don't mention Mr. Freud. Shout out.
Yeah.
Hope you're having a fantastic time wherever you are. So we've got, you know, so kink as itself is obviously used as this kind of diagnosis technique. So when you go back before that, what's really interesting is that we don't even feel a need to define kinky behavior. We don't even have terms for that. So when you have the likes of Fanny Hill, which is the first pornographic novel in English that we kind of consider, and it follows, written in 1749, and it follows the sex worker through her various escapades in London. And part of the novel is it's kind of like defining every sexual behavior, like she's meant to catalog it, right? And so within the course of this book from the 1700s, Fanny engages in whipping, she engages in like fetish play, she engages in orgies, she engages like whatever you can think of, like she's engaged in it. But what's so fascinating about this book is it isn't done like, oh my God. And at the time, the only act that brought it to prosecution was the fact that it included a sex scene between two men. That was the only thing that wasn't A-okay. And I find it, yeah, right? Like she's getting spanked and they're like, but you know that brief gay scene? But I think what's so fascinating when you look at this book and you look at the public reaction, right? That tells you that none of this is shocking. None of this is so out of the norm in Europe at the time that it's like, oh my God, what an experimental man who is imagining like hair fetish play and spanking and, you know, queer experiences with women. Like, it's not like that. It's it's very much it's a testament to the time and what people were doing. But you do see like phases that society goes through, kinky phases. So very soon after, London and a few other places in Europe, spanking became really in fashion, like very much in vogue. So like most brothels, and there was a lot of brothels in London at the time, offered spanking, and it wasn't uncommon to visit brothels just to get spanked. And this wasn't just like something you would do at night. Yeah, right. I know. Like you would just pop off at lunchtime, go get spanked, go back to work. Yeah.
I love it.
I know. It's fascinating. You just go for your daily spank because they thought at the time that it was really good for your health. It stimulated blood flow all throughout your body. Fuck, we will find a reason to justify anything. So for men, it was going to, and there is some, there's some physical evidence of it, you know, it will help them get up and stay hard for their partner. So for that reason, it was advised by some medical professionals to engage in spanking.
Wow.
Yeah. I know. Can you imagine? Just lunchtime, pop off, have a spank, go back to work, do the numbers.
I love that. Just sitting there thinking that anytime you go to the bank after lunch, you're like, did you get spanked? Spank teller?
They're sitting down on the chair and they're like, ooh. You're like, oh,
you just popped out for a quick spank. Yeah, me too. Okay.
Jeff's looking really healthy today. God, he must have worked. It's the equivalent of like going to the gym at lunchtime today is like going to get spanked in the 18th century. Like,
I love it. And to bring it back.
Bring it back. But it was so common that it actually became known as the English vice in other places in Europe at the time. And so, you know, you read like French texts and everything, and they'll talk about, did you engage in the English vice? Would you like to? And it was just about getting spanked because it was so common.
Oh my gosh. That is incredible. So we see so many different cultural kinks, like throughout history and cultures. And that is so fascinating that sometimes these things just like pop up into the zeitgeist of society. And what have you found like any signals as to why or how this happens? Like why all of a sudden everybody's getting spanked? Why all of a sudden there's, you know, a popularity in farts? Like what are we doing here? What is happening?
It's really interesting because it tells you a lot about what is going on externally with the culture at the time. So for an instance, like spanking, and as I was saying, you know, they were advertising it as a way to engage blood flow and get an erection, stay hard. And you'll see this at the rise of kind of medicalization and our understanding of medicine and the anatomy doing a lot better than it has at any other stage in history. And that's when you kind of see that behavior start to emerge. The play behavior and also scatology behavior, you can generally trace these back to time and places where sanitation and everything isn't great, which is also quite fascinating in itself. And another one is feet, right? Feet is one of the most popular fetishes of all time. And like when I say all time, I mean that in a historical sense of all time. It always remains one of the most popular kinks. But when it really takes off is during sexually transmitted epidemics in history. That's when we see the rise of foot fetishes. So during the 13th century gonorrhea epidemic, the 16th and 19th century syphilis epidemics, most recently the 20th century AIDS epidemic, and we don't have the stats yet, but I'm going to go as far as to say COVID, if I can predict it. I reckon we've seen a rise in the foot fetishes as well. And it's this really fascinating thing throughout history that when the genitals become too risky or like mouth-to-mouth contact, the next thing we see sexualize is feet. And there's some debated biological reasons, but we've seen this since ancient times.
What?
I know.
That's like, you know, if I am putting my little archaeology hat on or my historical hat on and trying to think about like what body part would I sexualize for feet, I feel that literally almost any other body part. But
Give me kneecap. Like,
I'm not here to yuck anyone's historical yum. Like, I'm not here to do that. But for me, in my brain, feet would be last. What kind
it's genuinely fascinating.
It's so interesting. What kind of evidence did you see of a foot fetish? Like, back, I mean, how far back are we talking?
You can very much, I think the earliest is we see evidence of foot fetishes in ancient Greece and ancient Egypt. We have, so for instance, in ancient Egypt, in some of the hieroglyphics that we have left, one of the most kind of revered positions is the masseuse of Egyptian rulers, right? So, but specifically the foot masseuse. And yeah, and there's some debate about whether or not this is a sexualized position, but then we see very soon after that, we see evidence of this kind of description of a footgasm, massaging the feet in a certain place that will cause like a sexual reaction. Wow. And I'll explain some of the biology in 2 seconds, but it was kind of like in ancient Greece as well. We see like in Herod's description of the birth of Aphrodite, right? One of the things that he talks about, he doesn't talk about like her buxom bosoms and her huge arms. The only physical part of her body he describes really in detail is her feet, her lovely feet from which life spurts from underneath. Like they spend a lot of time in the Odyssey and the Iliad talking about beautiful feet. This is a really common thing across the mass time period that is ancient Greece. We see a lot of lovely beautiful feet. By the time we get to like the troubadour poets as well, we're seeing descriptions of feet that aren't webbed. I don't know how common webbed feet were in the 13th century, but maybe.
Love that.
Yeah, and we see like very like poetry about the arches of feet, and so it's common enough. Which is there's a kind of very well quoted on the internet study, but very recently in 2001, Dr. Ramachandra was looking at the condition of like phantom limb patients. So patients who have lost one limb, but they can still feel it. And accidentally within this study, he discovered with phantom foot limb patients that not only could they still feel their foot when people kind of engage that area of their body or where that body part should be, but they also felt sexual stimulation at the same time, which was a kind of like unexpected finding from his study.
Yeah.
And so what he then theorized, which has been well quoted on the internet, wrongly or rightly, is that he said that the two areas of the brain, which is correct in the somatosensory cortex, that are responsible for feeling in the foot and feeling in the genitals, are really close together. They're right next to one another. And so he theorized that in some patients, those areas of the brain may cross over.
Whoa.
And have a bit of right. I know, mind-blowing stuff. And so when you have like the Kinsey Institute, which is, the one of the most famous, most prolific sex research institutes that we have today, we have the likes of Dr. Justin Lane Miller, who have discovered that 1 in 7 people today have fantasies that include feet or toes, right? Wow. And so if you look at maybe then this biology and you look at all of the evidence we have of feet being sexy in history, there's a really cool correlation. This is really cool.
It's amazing. See, this is why we need diversity in history. Like, we need diverse perspectives. We need diverse areas of research. I love this so much. This is the coolest thing that I've learned in a long time.
I love this as well. And what I really like about kind of, this kind of historical approach where you're kind of putting a whole different areas of learning all together, because they all go together. Because if you can't just look at, well, feet have popped up a lot in history. There's a whole lot of different things that add to that. And like, why do they pop up? Why are we so fucking obsessed with feet?
And now we know that there's a biological reason why people are into feet. I love it. It's just so cool.
We want to see it. All I can imagine, because like even your reaction now, just being like, I don't get the feet thing. I pride myself on thinking about the people back in ancient Greece as well, who would have like read the description and be like, why the fuck is he talking about her feet? Like that's gross. And it would have been the other 16, 7 of us who were like, we don't get it.
What is going on?
And now, like, same reaction.
Same feeling. Like, we are not that different from our ancient
that one person who's like, can we suck your toes? You're like, no, that's weird.
Yeah. And now I have a little bit more sympathy for them. So,
have you ever read Herod's The Aphrodite birth story? You might like that.
I have not. And you know what? That's going to be a little bit of homework for myself. And anybody out there, any delicious donuts out there that feel the need, you know what? I'll link that in the show notes. So
if feet are your thing, check out Aphrodite and the Troubadour Poets, and that's on influencing.
This is the kind of influencing that I endorse. Oh my gosh, Esmé, I could literally talk to you all day long, and I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I also want my listeners to go get your book, get Kinky History. There's Kindle version, there's paperback or hardback. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, both.
Both? Excellent. And the audio version, which is endorsed by Esmé herself, exclusively for that part, for the
descriptions live, what they really said.
And you definitely need to maybe get the audio and the paper version. So that is my recommendation. So to kind of end our episode today, I just want to ask you, what do you hope readers take away from the journey of our sexual past as human beings in your book?
First and foremost, the book and everything to do with kinky history is about helping people who have never felt represented in history books see themselves back in the pages. Because as I've kind of hopefully, we've talked about over this chat, there is nothing new under the sun. And so much about what makes us human and what we use to form our identity has been rooted in history for thousands of years. And if you're experiencing it today, there is a likely chance that someone 10 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 2,000 years ago went through an existential crisis. And so the part of the book, while we have it, it's fun, it's funny, it's conversational. It's also about helping people validate who they are and who they feel they need to be. So that is what I want people to take away. A welcoming book that is for everyone.
I love it. Oh my gosh, Esmé, thank you so much. Again, this book is Kinky History. I will put all of the links to everything in the show notes. And to end us today, Esmé, the floor is yours. Is there anything you want to plug? Where can people find you? Have at thee.
Stop it. Well, you can find me across socials at esme.louise. The book is obviously out, Kinky History. There is a 1-season limited podcast by the same name that you can go check out. But more importantly, I'm doing a new series with my mum at the moment of sex statistics. And so if you want to be part of the next round of stats that we're going to be using across the globe, go take our survey. Go take our global survey. Be part of a global study. Maybe the largest that's ever been done about sexuality. So that's fun. And grab a glass of wine. Do the survey. It's so much fun. Exactly. It's a fun survey.
Yeah, awesome. And I will put that in the show notes as well. So the listeners, the delicious donuts, have access to that easily. You can fill it out on your phone. I have filled it out already, and I can confirm it is fun. I love it. And that's it. Esmé, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. We battled the internet gods. We battled the scheduling gods, the Google calendar gods,
the flight gods. We've battled everything. Like, the ancient Greek tales of battling gods and goddesses. My God, we have done more than them. Like, truly. We could have our own fable.
Yes, we are the next Odyssey.
I'm about to say the same thing. Wonderful. On the same page. Great
mind. Thank you so much. And I am so happy to have you on. And I hope so many people read your book. And just thank you. Thank you for being you. Thank you for bringing so much education in a very needed field. And yeah, that's all I got. Thank you.
My gosh, girl, thank you so much for having me. Honestly, the work that you're doing and everything to do with the podcast, your empathy, you are a gorgeous person. And I just hope that all of the listeners enjoy the incredible community that you've created, because I am such a fan now. I'm obsessed with you.
Thank you so much. And I will see you, dear listener, my delicious donut, in the outro. Bye. Oh my God. Wasn't Esmé just an absolute gem? She's a gem of a person. She's a gem of a historian. And the internet is a better place because of her. And I am so glad and happy and all of those other positive adjectives that she came on to the podcast to talk to us. It has been a long time coming. There is a whole backstory on the scheduling for this and the actual recording of this episode. I swear to you that for some reason the gods did not want this episode to be aired because we had scheduling issues. I got sick and then she got sick, and so we had to reschedule, and then there was flight issues that she had, and then we had a Google Calendar mishap because time zones are weird and awful. Then while we were recording, her internet went down once, and then my internet went down once, and it was just bananas. But despite all of the odds, despite this Sisyphusian task that we had, we got the episode out, and it is one of my absolute favorite interviews that I have done. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you so much for joining us today. Remember, if you enjoy For the Love of History podcast, the best free 99 way to help support it is to share it with your friends, like, comment, and subscribe if you're listening on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast platform, rate and review and give the stars and all of the other rating thingies that you can do. It's so helpful, and it enables me to continue doing For the Love of History podcast. And if you'd like to support the podcast in other ways, you can join us over on Patreon. By the time this episode comes out, there will be a mini museum series up. It will be going up on Friday. I make 2 tiny little mini museum artifacts, and they're super freaking cute, and I take you through that process. I tell you about the history, and we just have a generally super fun time. Over on Patreon, you also get early and ad-free access to all episodes. You get monthly Sleepy History episodes, and so much more. So if that sounds like something you want to partake in, just go over there, and for less than a cup of coffee every month, you get a bunch of cool shit. So do that. I love ya. Thanks for listening. Drink some water. I'm going to take a little sippy sip right now. Do something that makes you happy. Go outside, touch some grass. I love you, and I'll see you next week for the For Real Korean witchcraft. I got sick, so we had to change the schedule for the episode releases, so I appreciate you being cool about that. But for real, we have Korean witchcraft next week. Okay, I'm rambling. Alrighty, I love you so much. Bye. Why is there a metronome right now? Oh, okay.